The fear of abandonment. It's a fear as an adoptee I've lived with my entire life. And along with it came the unspoken notion that if somehow I could keep everybody happy, I would never be abandoned. How has that worked for me? Not so well. But it led to a sense of having to be perfect. That was how I would keep everybody happy, by doing all the right things. And what I discovered, actually quite early in life, was how hard that was. I'd be coasting along, doing the right things, being the apple of my mother and father's eyes, the wonder child. And then, oops, I'd screw it up. And that usually meant the back of my legs with a hickory switch, a reminder of my inability to get it right. You would think that it would have been beaten out of me by the teen years, but it really hadn't. Although I was finding teen years to be much more difficult behaving. There were far more oopses, less hickory switches, and other newfound punishments. But overall, I was doing quite well, at least biblically. I hadn't messed with any of the commandments. I was pretty confident in my relationship with God, at least, if not the rest of the world. And then I first read Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, where he talks about unless your righteousness is greater than that of the Pharisees, you don't stand a chance. Well, I certainly was as good as the Pharisees. But then as Jesus reinterprets the commandments, I was feeling a little oopsie. I wasn't doing so well. And if that wasn't bad enough, those were the days when I was also forced to memorize Luther's Small Catechism in preparation for confirmation. And Luther takes Jesus' Sermon on the Mount and twists it another 180 degrees. There was no escaping. I was a big oopser in the eyes of God. What was I to do? There was no way I was going to get this thing right. It was much later, probably in my mid-20s, before I discovered what Jesus was all about. It came from a critical reading of Paul's letter to the Romans, especially those first few chapters. He does a marvelous thing in that opening. He starts talking with us about all those people. You know those people, them. We all have a list of them who are definitely not going to make it into the kingdom. We can pretty much agree. And then Paul does a more interesting thing. He starts talking a little more about those people that are in trouble of getting into the kingdom. And we start recognizing some of our friends and family members in that group. It's getting a little more uncomfortable. And then he tightens the screws a little more. And I start to recognize myself. But it's still okay. I can kind of rationalize my way out of it. At least I'm not as bad as those people. you know, them. So maybe I'll be okay. And then Paul gets to the point where he says, you know, worst of all are those that judge others. Oops. I just hung myself. So now what do I do? Well, Paul doesn't mince words. He says, since we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, let me talk about justification by grace. And he goes on to talk about what Jesus has done for us in securing our relationship with God in a way that we cannot, because we are an oops people. We just can't seem to get it right all the time. But God makes us right in His eyes, that we might have life, that we might not fear abandonment because of who we are or what we are or what we have done. So what does that mean about the law as Jesus and Luther talk about it? Well, it's that which has now driven us to God's mercy and grace. We recognize we can't stand on our own. But that law also offers us some guidance in how we live our lives together. Both the Ten Commandments and Luther's and Jesus' reinterpretation of those into daily life. If we practice that, we will be better. Oh, we'll still oops, but we may oops a little less. But more importantly, we will find a way to live together as the oopsie people of God, that we may all know God's love and grace.